Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. Today I'm going to do a video response to a couple of videos that I've seen recently dealing with the subject of voting. These videos are videos by Umar Johnson, Robert Perkins, aka the nigga with the tattoos, and Boyce Watkins. And although these men, have different beliefs to some degree, they essentially espouse views that can be considered to be black nationalist views. And all three of these men don't really believe in the electoral process. They're not like proponents of voting or participating in civic engagement. They don't view that as being something that's worthy or something that's important or something of value. And I'm just going to take time to respond to some of the things that they said in their videos and just to express my thoughts about this whole question of voting. As many of you know, I did a couple of videos about this subject already, but I just feel the need to talk about this because we are in an election year, and it's not just about the presidential election. Many people are wrapped up in just the presidential election aspect of this, when really you're voting for members of Congress. You're also voting in local elections around this country. Local elections for who's going to be the next mayor, who's going to be on your city council, who's going to be your state senator and your state representative, and even your prosecutors. But for some reason, these men don't see any value in the electoral process, and we're going to talk about that right now. One thing that Umar Johnson said is that we need to stop looking for white saviors. And in response to that, I'll say this. When somebody votes, they're not looking for a quote unquote white savior. They're not looking for someone to save them. They don't believe that a politician is going to magically solve all the problems in society. No rational person who understands politics believes that. What people are doing is they're weighing their options. They're looking at the policy positions of various politicians, and they're making an informed decision based upon those policy positions. When these corporations, when these interest groups finance and support candidates, they don't view those candidates as saviors. They view them as people that they can influence so that they can effect policy changes. And it's really just that simple. Every aspect of our lives is to some degree regulated by laws passed on the local level and on the federal level. These laws are passed by politicians. Whether it deals with something that's very mundane to things that are very complex, like things that involve our basic human and civil rights. Those decisions are made by politicians who are elected by the people. So by voting, you are making an informed decision about which policies you support, which type of candidates you support, what direction you want the country to move in, or what direction you want your city to move in or your state to move in. It's not about a savior. That's a childlike understanding of politics to actually expect someone to magically solve all the world's problems just by being elected. It's really unrealistic, and that's the perspective that many people had. People had unrealistic expectations of politicians like Obama. They expected him to save the world upon being elected to the White House. And because these unrealistic expectations weren't met, these people have lost hope and they've lost faith in the process. When really they didn't even understand politics, they didn't understand how it works. So they set themselves up for disappointment. Now, this man, Dr. Umar Johnson, also went on to say that you can vote all your life and you won't change anything. Nothing you do, this is what he said, nothing you vote for is going to change that black people are at the bottom. That's what he said. And just to look at history proves a lot of what he's saying wrong in terms of the status of black people in this country. Of course, we have a long way to go to make it towards progress, to make it towards, a truly egalitarian or equal and fair and just society. But to suggest somehow that we have made no progress or there has been no change, that is to simply ignore reality. And part of the change that we see in our lives has been a result, both of us gaining our our right to vote, and also has been a product of decisions made by politicians to pass certain laws. Decisions to pass, the amendments, like the 13th Amendment, ending slavery. I mean, if it wasn't for the 13th Amendment ending slavery, slavery would still be legal. So this idea that laws and politicians don't affect our lives is preposterous, because we would still be slaves if a law wasn't passed ending slavery. You had the 14th Amendment guaranteeing people equal protection under the law. And you've had other civil rights laws passed over time that have created progress in this society. You had the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, and many other civil rights laws that have been passed that have made it possible for us to have basic human and civil rights in this country. Laws that have made it possible for more African Americans to get a higher education, to advance in life, to become professionals. That's why you have an expanded middle class in the black community compared to 50 years ago. That's why you have less poverty now than you had 50 years ago. That's why you have more elected officials now than you had 50 years ago. Because of laws that have been passed and because of us being able to exercise certain rights. So this notion that laws don't change anything or voting changes nothing, that's just not factual. When you look at the progress that has been made in the black community, when you look at the number of black elected officials and other things that I just mentioned. Now, Umar Johnson also said something that is just wrong. It's just flat out wrong. He said when you vote, you don't vote for policy. Policy is already in place. This man says this without providing any proof whatsoever behind that statement. Of course, there are interest groups that write certain policies. They draft certain model legislation that they want to be passed, and they maneuver and they manipulate and they try to get their draft legislation actually passed into law. They use the political process to make that happen. They use their influence to make those things happen. But they have to lobby for those things. They have to push for those things, just like we need to push and lobby for policies that we want. So The notion that, a policy is already in place and the president just passes the policy. No, the president comes into office with a certain agenda in mind based on the groups that have influence on him, based on the groups that have sway on the president. And if you don't participate in the process, you won't have any sway over the types of policies that the president implements or the type of policies that the president pushes. If you withdraw from the process, only the most reactionary of forces will have sway over the president's policy. So it's just false to suggest that, the president already has policy in place, um, that the president has no, well, actually, not that the president has no policies in place, but that a policy is already in place and the president just goes forward with that policy. No, the policy is shaped by the president. He has influence to advocate for certain policies, to push certain legislative agendas in Congress. So it's just false. People vote for candidates based on their policy positions again. Now he also, and I'm talking about Dr. Umar Johnson, he said it is a matter of picking who's going to oppress you. When you vote, that's what you're doing. You're voting for who's going to oppress you. And he says, why does it matter who's going to be the warden of the jail if they're all going to do the same exact job? I mean, that's just, all that is rhetoric. That's all that is. I mean, if you compare the presidential candidates and their policies, you see that there are stark differences between these candidates. Not just between the Democrats and the Republicans, but even among the Democrats, there are differences. There are policy differences that are clear between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. But people are just lazy. They don't want to investigate. They don't want to study. They don't want to do their own research to understand the policy differences. Instead, they want to paint things with a broad brush and use these ridiculous, oversimplified generalizations and empty rhetoric. You're not choosing who's going to oppress you. You're choosing which candidate best serves your interests based on their policy positions. A president is not a warden over a jail. The president has all kinds of power that actually affects and impacts our lives. The president decides who's going to be on the Supreme Court. The people on the Supreme Court make decisions that affect our lives. They define what our constitutional rights are through their interpretation of the law. They define whether or not you're going to have affirmative action. They decide whether or not Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act will remain in place. They decide what kind of rights a person has. They decide whether or not the death penalty is legal or not. They decide whether or not certain abortion procedures can be implemented or banned. They decide what kind of privacy rights we all have. They decide all kinds of rights that we have. Our right to be free. Our rights in terms of torture and all kinds of things. So the notion that voting doesn't matter is just non-factual. All right, I'm back. As you heard, the phone was ringing. I hate when things interrupt my flow, but let me just roll with it and see what I can do. All right, so another point that Umar Johnson makes is he says Obama ignored black people and took care of every other non-white minority in this country. And then he goes on to say that Obama cannot change anything. But, and he said for that reason, he's not mad at Obama for not making change or not bringing about a change, which is really false. That idea that Obama can't change anything is ridiculous. I mean, Obama has passed laws, lobbied for laws and had them passed. Laws that are going to affect our lives, our community's lives. Like the Affordable Care Act, which expanded health care to many people who were denied coverage or who did not have insurance coverage. People who were denied coverage for pre-existing conditions or people who could not afford to purchase health care insurance. Obamacare, so-called Obamacare, expanded those opportunities. The Fair Sentencing Act, something that Obama pushed for, something that he pushed for, reduced the sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine. Something that has been used to increase mass incarceration of black people. Obama passed the Brothers Keeper program, which has helped cities like Newark, New Jersey, where they have large African American populations. And also, Obama's administration entered settlement agreements with police departments around the country to deal with the issue of discrimination and police brutality. Cleveland was one of those cities, if I'm not mistaken, and they recently reached an agreement with Ferguson. At one point, um, Ferguson backed out of the agreement and there was going to be a lawsuit and all that kind of stuff. But from what I understand, they reached an agreement and they're trying to create reforms in that police department. So the idea that Obama can't change anything is just simple-minded. That's just a simple generalization. It's not backed up with facts. I just gave a couple of examples of how Obama has affected change. Of course, there's much to be desired. There's much more that he could have done. But there are many things that he has done that have benefited the black community. And I'll post a card in the description, a card in this video so that you can read an article that I did, probably a year ago or longer than that. It was probably actually longer than that, a couple of years ago. In that article, I spell out why I voted for Obama. And I cite examples of actual things that he has done for black people. Things that benefit us directly. So this notion that Obama did nothing for black people, it's just not factual. It's an exaggeration again. And then he says that Obama didn't give voice to the black situation or to our problems. Again, of course, Obama could have said more, but we got to understand that he is not Al Sharpton. He is not Dr. Umar Johnson. He's not Cornel West. He's the president. And he takes on a different role and a different responsibility. But even with that being the case, the president has spoken out about racism in this country. The famous statements that he made about Trayvon Martin, about if he had a son, he would be like Trayvon Martin. He would look like Trayvon Martin. And he actually went further to say that he could have been Trayvon Martin. So he has given voice to the black situation. He may not have spoken up as often as we would have liked him to, but he has spoken out about issues affecting us. And even more important than speaking out, he's done things. He had his Justice Department investigate these cases of police brutality. And as I said, he reached settlement agreements His Justice Department reached settlement agreements with some of these jurisdictions, and others are still under investigation. So let's not pretend like Obama has done nothing. Let's not pretend like Obama has not spoken out. He spoke out when um, when Lewis Gates, Henry Louis Gates, had a problem with the police. He talked about how the police behave stupidly and all that. So let's not pretend like Obama's never spoke out about any kind of black issues at all. Again, that's just another exaggeration. And then, the last point I'll make about Umar is that he said that Donald Trump is no different than these other politicians. And he said that, the policy is the same and all that kind of stuff. That's just not true. I challenge somebody to prove to me that a Donald Trump has the same policies as a Bernie Sanders or as even a Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are far apart on all kinds of issues. Bernie Sanders is talking about redistribution of wealth. Bernie Sanders is talking about free higher education for people. Bernie Sanders is talking about not Obamacare. He's talking about a single payer healthcare system that has healthcare and Medicare for all. He's talking about reining in Wall Street, holding Wall Street accountable, holding Wall Street responsible and requiring them to pay their fair share in taxes. Donald Trump is not talking about those things. He actually has a racial justice agenda that he's pushing. And I'm talking about Bernie Sanders. Donald Trump has no such agenda. So the notion that there are no policy differences between these candidates is just false. Again, I urge you to do your own research on these candidates. And when I get around to it, I will post links to each one of these candidates' websites so that you can look them up. I'm going to post a link to Donald Trump's website so you could read what his positions are, and Bernie Sanders' website and Hillary Clinton's website. So you can read it for yourself what their policy positions are. Nobody handed them their policies. They have policies and they're running on their policies. So we got to cut it out with this foolishness. People pass off all this ignorance as if it's some kind of enlightenment when it is not. This idea that we can't affect any kind of change through the electoral process. No one has said the electoral process is the solution to all of our problems. But it is one of the tools to affect some change in society. And that's documented by historical examples. Now I want to move on to the next person that I wanted to discuss. And that's Robert Perkins. He used to go by the name of the nigga with the tattoos. I just find it astounding, that you have these people that have thousands of subscribers. They have the ability to influence a crowd or to encourage people to take action, to make a difference in their community. Instead of doing that, they want to spread a message of hopelessness, spread a message of apathy, spread a message of inaction, spread a message that's based on empty rhetoric and talk, instead of actually doing something to actually affect change in society. Again, our lives are governed by policy. If you don't participate in the electoral process, you don't have any effect over the policies that affect your life. when I think about what Robert Perkins said in his video, I just think about how ignorant these people are, some of these people. I mean, and he's a brother that I respect. You know, I watched some of his videos. I respect, you know, some of the things that he says. He has some intelligent things to say. You know, I agree with him on some points. On other points, I don't agree with him. And this is one of those points that I don't agree with him on. I don't understand that. This guy said, well, since Bernie Sanders didn't stand with Malcolm X, that he's not legitimate. Basically, he doesn't have the kind of credentials that meet his standards, meet, you know, Robert Perkins standards. We got to get over this idea that in order to vote for somebody, they have to be absolutely perfect. We have to get rid of that idea. If someone is on point with all these other issues, I think that it's silly to dismiss them because they didn't, quote unquote, walk with Malcolm X. That's ridiculous to me. That's stupid to me. You had somebody that sacrificed and stood up for civil rights, and you're going to dismiss them like that. And then this guy went on to say that voting is a waste of time anyway. Hillary Clinton already has this in the bag. That's his attitude. Hillary Clinton already has this in the bag. You know, it's already fixed. You know, she's been given the chance to run for president. She's next since Obama was president before. So it's all lined up. It's all pre-planned. She's already been selected and all this and that. This dude offers zero proof for this. Zero proof of this conspiracy that has already selected her. Despite what, you know, we want to do, what kind of votes we plan to make, it's already decided and etched in stone. I mean, where's the proof for this? I challenge anyone to present proof. They won't present proof because there is no proof. All you have is another example of rhetoric, empty rhetoric that can't be substantiated, can't be proven. It's just more talk. And you know what they say, talk is cheap. People like Hillary Clinton, people like Donald Trump, the reactionary elements of society get elected when the people don't participate in the process, when the people are not voting, when the people don't turn up and show up and actually cast their vote for more progressive candidates like a Bernie Sanders, then you get what you get. You end up with the status quo. You end up with candidates like Hillary Clinton. If she has it in the bag, as Robert Perkins says, then it is because of people like Robert Perkins who opt out of the system and don't participate to actually make a difference. They're counting on people not to vote. When people had this idea that these candidates are inevitable, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But when you stand up and try to make a difference, then perhaps there'll be a different outcome. If instead of sitting at home talking stuff on YouTube, you got out there and vote or mobilize your audience to vote, then maybe there will be a different outcome. Maybe Hillary wouldn't be the Democratic nominee. We don't know what's going to ultimately happen. We don't know who's going to be elected. But we have the chance right now to make a difference by voting for the better candidate. by voting for somebody like Bernie Sanders. And then, this guy, Robert Perkins, I mean, these people come up with all kinds of excuses, all kinds of ridiculous rationalizations and justifications for not participating in the process. He goes on to say, well, Bernie Sanders can say anything because he knows he's not going to get elected. I mean, where's the proof behind this? He's not just making promises out of thin air. I mean, this man, Bernie Sanders, has a track record on all of these issues that he is advocating for in this election. He didn't just come up with these ideas because he's running for office. He's been an elected official for years now, pushing these same progressive ideas. So it's not about him, quote unquote, knowing he's not going to be elected. The next issue I want to deal with is this whole reparations question. And I've discussed this in another video, and that video is real detailed. It's about Bernie Sanders and his statements about reparations, and it's also about these other Democratic politicians who don't support the reparations, like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. They don't support reparations. And my point is simple in this video right here. We can't afford to decide to opt out of the electoral process based on one issue, based solely on the question of reparations. When there are so many other issues that impact our lives, like education, like mass incarceration, like police brutality, like unemployment, like poverty, the educational disparities, the school to prison pipeline, and those things. We can't afford to just throw out all those other issues chasing after reparations. Are we entitled to reparations? Absolutely. Do I support reparations? Absolutely. And I think that we should push all candidates to support reparations. But I'm not going to opt out of the process simply over that one issue when there are other issues that are important, that are vital to our advancement as a people. To do so is just not smart, it's not wise, it's frankly just stupid. Again, there are going to be flaws with candidates that are running for office. There are obviously going to be flaws. But ultimately, it's about making the better choice between the candidates who are running. And if you don't want to vote for the Democrats or Republicans, vote third party. But vote for somebody who represents the interests of our people. Vote for somebody that represents our people, our interests. And it's not just about voting for a candidate. We have to establish our agenda. And there are many that have established agendas that deal with our community. Establish the agenda and push the agenda and demand that politicians embrace the agenda. And if they don't embrace it, don't vote for them. If they pretend to embrace it and then they actually don't implement it, hold them accountable through the electoral process. Through your dollars, hold them accountable. Now, I just want to go back to, some of the things that Umar Johnson talked about. He talked about the need for Black people to develop a solid economic, political, and spiritual program, and how we need to save ourselves and all that kind of stuff. And he also talked about the school to prison pipeline, education, and all those things. Even if Black people establish our own businesses, establish our own schools, the fact of the matter is we live in America, and even those institutions are governed by laws implemented by government, by elected officials through the electoral process. So if we want laws that serve our interests, even as we build our own, we need to participate in the process. We need to have influence over the process. It's really that simple. And I don't understand why it's so hard to understand that. Government laws make it possible for these immigrants and other groups to set up businesses in our community, to get the kinds of loans that they need to establish business. Government policy has the ability to make it easier for us to open businesses. The taxes that businesses are have to pay and all those types of things impacts, the prosperity of those businesses. So this notion that somehow we live outside of this political process is just absurd and silly. We live in America. We are not on some isolated, separate territory. We're governed by the laws of this country. And if we are governed by the laws, why not try to influence those laws just like any other group does? When corporations and Wall Street and other interests go to the government, they're not asking the government to save them. They're trying to influence government so that government can serve their interests. It's just that simple. Now I want to move on to some things that Boyce Watkins said on this issue as well. And he made his analysis was really simple, and childlike, not sophisticated at all, and he is a scholar and everything, but I don't think politics is his strong suit. I think that he's better talking about businesses and all that kind of stuff and entrepreneurship. He made these false um, equivalents or made these false choices um, in his video. He compared voting for candidates to making a choice between rotten eggs and dog crap. And he said, well, I opt out of those choices. Let me go elsewhere. Go to some restaurant and get a steak instead of dealing with your choices of rotten eggs or dog crap. First of all, I just think that analogy is faulty, to say the least. When you compare the candidates again, when you compare a Bernie Sanders to a Hillary Clinton or to a Donald Trump, you'll see that it's not a choice between rotten eggs and dog crap. You see that Bernie Sanders, again, is very progressive on the issues that matter to people, to Black people, to all people, to working people, to poor people. Issues like free education, again, issues like the redistribution of wealth, free health care for all. How can that be compared to rotten eggs? How can such policies be compared to dog crap? Such a comparison is faulty, to say the least. And I just want to make a couple of other points about what Boyce Watkins had to say. He also said that he doesn't see anything about these candidates that is going to make life better for Black people. And that's just That's just not factual. I mean, if you look at, Bernie Sanders' policies with respect to racial justice, he has an economic policy, he has an education policy, he has a voting rights policy, all these criminal justice policy, all of these policies outline things that will benefit the black community. So what is Boyce Watkins talking about? I mean, Boyce Watkins, have you even read Bernie Sanders' um, website or uh, listened to him talk about the issues, or even listen to these other candidates and their positions on the issues? It is just simply false to say that there is no choice, that you have a poor choice between these candidates, that you have no real choice. It's just false. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of other points before I go. This video is long. It's one of my longest videos ever. And that's this. Boyce Watkins talked about how we need to focus on building wealth in our community. And I agree with that. I agree that we should try to build more wealth in our community. I agree with his point about how we need to supplement our children's education. But I don't agree with his point that those are the things that we need. Those things alone will bring about some kind of change or advancement in our community. First of all, you need government policy in order to build wealth. The reason why many of us can't build wealth is because we can't get loans. That's part of the problem. We don't have access to capital. We don't have wealth. Many of these other groups, they start off with wealth. They have family that backs them up. Like Donald Trump, he talked about how he had it so bad that his father only gave him $1 million or something to start his business. So even to build wealth, that requires some kind of government policies to make that possible. So the notion that you can just build wealth and don't have to worry about government policy is just silly. I mean, and then also the notion that everybody is going to be an entrepreneur is just ridiculous. I mean, everybody has different skill sets, as somebody else pointed out in another video. Everybody's not cut out to be an entrepreneur. And even if you have these black successful business people, black capitalism is not the answer to our problems. Even if you have a couple of billionaires, contrary to what Boyce Watkins said, that's not going to end police brutality. Many of these black wealthy billionaires and millionaires, they couldn't care less about the black community. They don't identify with the black community. They tried to run from the black community and assimilate with white society. They don't have any kind of racial solidarity or commitment to their people. And businesses are not really based on racial solidarity. Businesses are driven by profit. That's what business is driven by. And the emergence of a black capitalist class won't save the black workers or the black middle class. So, those are just some of my thoughts on that, on this whole issue of black people voting. I could go on, but this video is long enough. So please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace. And I'll just make this point before I go. It came to me after I did the other segments of this video. But that's this. Throughout Robert Perkins' video, he kept mentioning the Electoral College. He kept saying the Electoral College this, the Electoral College that, as if he was making some kind of valid point or something, as if he was making some great revelation or some kind of profound statement. Everyone who understands politics knows about the Electoral College. That's not some kind of secret. That's not some kind of great information. The president is elected by the electors in the Electoral College. The electors are pledged to vote according to the popular vote in each one of their states. So the electors vote in accordance with each state that they're from. And there have been rare examples where electors have not voted in accordance with their pledge, but in those rare situations, it did not affect the outcome of the election. So this notion that the Electoral College is doing something completely contrary to the will of the people in the states is just not true. It's just false. So people need to quit saying it like it's some kind of great statement, like they're proving that there is no democracy and that our vote doesn't count, because it's just not factual. And then the whole Electoral College issue is just used as an excuse to justify not participating in the electoral process, because we directly elect our senators, our U.S. senators, our Congress people, our mayors and our governors and our city council and our prosecutors and other officials. So the Electoral College can't be used as some justification for not voting. Not voting doesn't solve anything. Not voting doesn't empower black people. It doesn't liberate black people. In fact, not voting is nothing but surrender. It's nothing but self-defeat. It's nothing but apathy.